Good evening, Salaam Alaikum, and welcome to tonight's episode of Talking Points. I'm your host, as usual, Syed Niaz Ahmed. In our studios today, we have a very eminent journalist, a historian, an author, and a writer. None other than Mr. Syed Badrul Hasan. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
How are you?
Fine, meeting you after a long time.
Yes,
and
yes.
It's always
As I
wonderful
was
to be back at NTV Europe.
As I was saying that we are like migratory birds. See, winter comes in to Britain and we go to Bangladesh and other countries for some warmer climes.
Yes, correct.
How was your trip?
My trip was indeed very exciting, but it kept me busy because my wife and I had to travel to Dhaka, and from Dhaka to Calcutta, from Calcutta to Delhi, and back to Dhaka, and from Dhaka back to the UK. But in all these three cities, Dhaka, Calcutta, and Delhi, I had some speaking engagements, assignments, and I'd been invited by two Indian organizations, NatStrat, which is headed by a former Indian High Commissioner to Bangladesh, who later retired as Deputy National Security Advisor in India, Mr. Pankaj Saran. And there's the other organization called India Narrative. These two organizations invited me. Additionally, in Calcutta, I was invited to a two-day program, in fact, a three-day program organized by an organization, arranged by an organization called Bangla Worldwide. So these things kept me busy. So
that's a very interesting name, Bangla Worldwide.
Bangla Worldwide, yes. So.
I would have thought that Bangla is only spoken at a state level, only in West Bengal and Bangladesh, but they have greater visions, obviously. Recently, you wrote an article, which is again on Bangla and language and diversity and all that. Going back to 21 February, this day was declared by UNESCO as the International Language Day, but somehow we think that this is only about Bangla language. You see, it is not. This was as UNESCO believes in importance of cultural and linguistic diversity, works to foster tolerance and respect for others. You see, and this respect for others is the underlying thought.
Absolutely.
In accepting that everybody who speaks a language that is his language, and that must be respected. See. There's some 7,000 living languages in world, and 21 February is the International Language Day for us as we celebrate. See. And diversity, this is what UNESCO believes, as much as the issues around marginalization of indigenous people and the loss of their languages. Now, when we talk about language and we talk about the language movement that goes back to 1952 in Dhaka, when some 5 persons were killed, and we understand they were shaheeds to the movement, for the movement. We fought for the recognition of our language. See. We were talking about freedom of speech. Now, in your article, you talk about the freedom of speech, the freedom of expression, and freedom of printing something, and freedom of publishing it, and then being able to reach the readers. You see. But it did not happen in some cases, that some of the books were proscribed at the 21 February Boy Mela. And some publishers were not allowed to print those books, and some people were not allowed to have their own stall in the Mela. How do you see this against the background that obviously 21 February stands for freedom of speech?
Of course, 21 February, as you pointed out just now, it stands for freedom of speech, and it was when it occurred, when these shooting incidents occurred in February 1952, the whole program, the whole agitation was aimed at democracy, freedom of expression in our part of the world, at that time East Pakistan, and we needed to have our own Bengali language as the supreme, as the supereminent presence as a state language of Pakistan. And at the same time, it was our intention to see to it that nothing was imposed on us, on our people, in an arbitrary or authoritarian manner. We did not have anything against Urdu, see, because Urdu is a wonderful language, is a very poetic language, literary language.
But nobody was against anything.
No, but what we opposed was the fact that Urdu was being the authorities of Pakistan at that time, right from Mr. Muhammad Ali Jinnah up to Khaja Nazimuddin, they tried to impose Urdu on us. So that was our resistance to Urdu, to the imposition of Urdu. Moving on from there, I have always believed that 21 February, what happened on 21 February was an expression of democratic dissent on the part of the people, that people should have democracy, the state should have democracy, and it should be, we all wanted an inclusive society. Now, 19 years later, 19 years after 1952, we achieved a sovereign, independent Bangladesh. Now, in Bangladesh today, we have, as you pointed out, it's the issue of indigenous languages. The United Nations, UNESCO, recognizes these. And we also recognize these because in our country, apart from Bengalis, we are a majority Bengali-speaking people, and there are also people who belong to different ethnic groups in the country, like the Mros, the Chakmas, the Shautals, the Marmas. All these people, they also should have the right. I mean, their rights to use their own language, to have their children have education in their own mother languages, mother tongues, those also should be guaranteed. That is, and I'm glad to say that the Bangladesh government has of late been taking measures to ensure that these languages survive
and preserve,
and that they're looking for teachers to teach these languages to these their languages to these the people who belong to these communities. Now, having said that about the 21 Boimela this year. 21 Boimela is every book fair. Every book fair is an expression of the cultural heritage of a people. So long till this time, we have had these expressions of cultural, linguistic heritage for the country. The fact that we are the inheritors of an age-old culture, Bengali language, in terms of language, in terms of songs, in terms of music, in terms of our daily expression in the villages and the towns. But this time when it was decreed that some books ought not to be there, that some stalls should not be there, that militated against the spirit of Ekushe. So that is what I wanted to point out. So because if we should give people, we should give readers the right to buy books, to read books. It is up to them. You buy a book, I buy a book. You may not like that book, I may like that book, but that's a matter of individual opinion. But to decree, but to impose a decision on people, to tell them that you cannot read these books, and to inform publishers that because they have printed books which the authorities may not like, they can't have a stall, that goes against the spirit of Ekushe.
Clamping ban on books, not permitting a publisher to open a bookstall, and removing a statue installed by young persons in defense of free speech. See? This is what we were talking about, see. But can we go back, and what was this statue?
Well, this statue was actually prepared by a group of students, not a very good statue, but then they were, one may agree with them, one may not agree with the position they took. It was their way of protesting this clamping down on freedom of expression. And they had this statue of Rabindranath Tagore with his lips sealed, his fingers nailed, as a way of showing that freedom of expression through a ban on books, through not letting stalls function at the Ekushe Book Fair. That was their way of protesting it. So there are different voices. Should they have done it? or shouldn't they have done it? That's beside the point.
Right.
The point is they made that statue, and in a country, if you believe it's a democratic society, you have to agree that people have different viewpoints to express on different issues. And if you ask me again, I think, say, a book, see, when we publish book, the more books we publish, the better society gets to be. But then, when one tries to ban books, society takes a backward step. So that is the whole point. A lot of us have tried to make. So you let publishers bring forth their books. Let writers come forth with their books. It's up to the buyer to judge. Whenever when you go to a bookstall or bookshop anywhere, you pick up a book, you look at the contents. You may like the contents and take the book home. You buy the book home. Then there are other books you may not like. You just leave them there. But let the reader decide. I will see. You want to buy a book? I will never tell you not to read that book. It's a bad book. It's a good book. Whatever. It's up to you to judge. In the same way, you'll do the same to me.
See, consider me educated enough to understand what is good for me and what is not. See,
exactly, because
the
people who
should not be interfering.
Anybody who goes to a bookshop or a bookstall, he's educated enough, qualified enough to know what is good for him, what is not good for him.
Good. So it was all in the defense of free speech. See.
Free speech, yes, because see, a book is an expression of free speech. As say when we started with Ekushe and Ekushe book fair, all these are symbolic of our objective of ensuring free speech in the country.
And the whole nation looks forward to the Ekushe Boi Mela because
yes.
Young, old, I have been there twice or thrice, I think, and
because that is
so crowded and it's
that is where people come together
and all that, and yet people.
And that is I see the Ekushe Boi Mela is also a sign of secular democracy in practice. The fact that Bangladesh is an idea, a very thriving idea, that is renewed every year through the Ekushe Boi Mela. Of course, COVID-19 had an impact, but then we had the Ekushe Boi Mela in March last year. Right. But this year we had it in proper time. So I think the Ekushe Boi Mela is not just about book fairs, it's about the democratic expressions of a people.
True. Yeah. And it also promotes education in a way, isn't it?
Yeah,
See, you promote people to encourage people to read.
Yes.
See, you encourage people to write. You encourage people to thereby publish and sell.
Absolutely. Yes.
See, so if that helps people read, if that helps people spend time with their favorite writers, you see, so that is the expression of freedom of speech as well as a spread of knowledge.
Definitely.
That is the only way people can learn.
Definitely, yes. Yes. Because in the past, we have history tells us that books were burned through the generations, through the centuries, and books are proscribed. And every time books have come back, writers have come back, because the more you go against writers, against books, the more there's a backlash.
Yeah, a certain book was burnt in Cambridge, you remember?
Yes.
And whatever the content was, see, a lot of people stood up and said that no, you should not be burning the books. See, you should be. There are other ways of telling him or others or opposing him and saying that you don't agree with him.
True.
But just by proscribing and asking him or asking the publishers not to print something. But isn't there something else in some countries, and I'm sure it's also in Bangladesh, that a publisher to print something has to get permission from the government?
Not really, because publishers, they print your manuscripts. I give my manuscript to a publisher, he will print it. But then if a publisher, of course, will know which manuscript has dangerous content, has seditious content, that he will decide, because he has a board of editors.
Self-censorship.
Self-censorship. Because if I'm a publisher, I will also see to it that the authors who give their manuscripts to me, those manuscripts are free of any assault on the state or anything that goes against security.
Hate and
yes, though these spreading hate, religious hate or political hate, or indulging in acts which are plainly seditious, that is for the publisher to decide. But I don't think, no, the government does not have that kind of policy to ask publishers to submit their manuscripts to the government, and the government, that is not there.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Because I have lived in some countries where it was like that in the Middle East, you see, because even the textbooks had to be submitted to the Ministry of Information, and then whether they understood it or not, but you have to get
that reminds me, in my younger days, I'm talking the early 80s, when I was still a student of Dhaka University, in fact waiting for my results, I used to teach in an English medium school in Dhaka, and at that point in March 1982, General Ershad seized the state in a coup d'etat. A few days later, orders came to the school principal, to all English medium schools in Dhaka city, to have all the textbooks being taught from nursery class up to class 10 to be submitted to the martial authorities in Sher Bangla Nagar. And the principal of the school, she took me into confidence, and she said, "Badul, you take these books and show them to him." And I went there. It was a junior officer, captain, see, and I told him that these are the books that we teach. So he just looked at the
pictures.
Not even the pictures, the titles on the covers. I said, "Fine, please take them." So these were acts. I mean, why should a government, even if it's a military government which has just seized power, so why would it want school textbooks to be taken to the headquarters and then brought back? I mean, these things, these are, I will not say they were horrific things, but they're pretty, there were things that ended up being comical. So,
yeah, it was an order that had to be carried on.
Yes, exactly.
And there was no heart in it.
No, because on the radio, one fine morning, the newsreader on Bangladesh Betar didn't turn up. And then one official was asked to read the news. And poor fellow, he made a mistake. He said, LT General H.M. Ershad. And the general himself heard it. I think the poor fellow either was put under suspension or he lost his job. So these are whimsical things.
He was a light general, LT.
LT, yes.
I've been talking about Bangladesh, 21 February, and now we are in the month of March. Today is the 5th, and only 2 days later, 7th of March, we know it's part of history that Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman delivered a very significant historical speech in Dhaka, and that was probably the gist of the struggle for an independent country. Sayyid Badul Hassan, were you there in Dhaka at that time?
No, I was not. We were in Quetta, Balochistan, and we were desperately turning the knob on the radio to listen to Bangabandhu's speech. But then on that day, the broadcast had been stopped by the Pakistani military authorities, and as a result, all the Bengali officers and other employees walked out of the radio station in Shahbag. But the next morning, on the 8th of March, at 8 o'clock in the morning, I mean 7 o'clock in Dhaka, in Quetta, and 8 o'clock in Dhaka, I tuned into the radio, and there was Bangabandhu's speech we heard on the radio, because finally the Pakistanis had decided that the speech needed to be broadcast, but then that was not a live broadcast. That was a day later. So that was when I first heard of Bangabandhu's speech. It was distant. The radio was not giving us the proper sounds, but then we could make out what you were saying. I woke up my father from bed. It was a cold day, March 7, in cold Quetta, and father and son, we both listened to the speech.
I mean, I know that you were a very young person at that time.
I was in school. I was in class 9 at the time.
Yes. But what went through your mind when you hear the speech?
Well, actually, on the 6th
Do you understand the implication?
I did, and I was quite sure that we were finally on the road to freedom. And the day before, on the 6th of March, in school, at the end of school, this is very interesting. I told my teachers and my classmates that tomorrow, because at that time there was a lot of speculation about Bangabandhu declaring Bangladesh's independence on the 7th of March. And as a young person, I was really looking forward to independence being declared. So, an idealistic young man.
Excitement.
So I told my teachers and my fellow students in school that tomorrow, today is the 6th of March, I'm still a citizen of Pakistan, but tomorrow I'll be a citizen of Bangladesh because our leader will declare our country's independence. And they were pretty horrified and all that. But then,
how did you take it?
So, well, my teachers, they were quite surprised. See, and they said, "Oh, it'll be one country. Let's pray it stays as one country." But then that's what I told them, and of course it didn't happen. But then after on the 8th of March, when we heard the speech on the radio, I went to school an hour later and told my fellow students again, I just heard the speech, and I think he has not declared independence, but he has told us that we'll be free one day. So that was my first impression of Bangabandhu's speech, and that was the first time I heard him speak in Bangla, because I had met him in Quetta when he went on his election campaign in July 1970. He spoke in Urdu very briefly, but as far as his Bangla speech was concerned, that was the first time. Many of the words I did not understand what he was saying, because first of all it was so distant, and secondly my own vocabulary, my own Bangla vocabulary was not very good at that time. But then when at the end he said, "Ebarer Shongram amader muktir Shongram, ebarer Shongram amader Shadhinota Shongram," then I could understand what he said. So
obviously you have heard that speech many times.
Oh yes, yeah, we all have.
Later.
Yes.
And why do you think that? Do you think ever has this occurred to you that he did not declare independence, but it was just short of that? See, Ebare Shongram, Mukti Shongram.
Yeah.
If you say this in English, it would be Ebare Shongram. The struggle this time is for
emancipation.
So it was, but it wasn't.
My judgment is that Bangabandhu, he was an elected leader. He was elected, he was at that point the majority leader in the Pakistan National Assembly, and he would have been or should have been Pakistan's first elected prime minister. But that move was thwarted by the military regime and also by the machinations of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and his party. Bangabandhu didn't declare independence on that day. So, a couple of reasons there. First of all, it was his belief that a majority section of the population, which we Bengalis were, 56% of Pakistan's population to 44% in the then West Pakistan, a majority, as he also later explained, a majority section of the population does not secede. So he was not willing to be regarded as a secessionist. So that was, and it was very calculated and very strategic move on his part. He did not want to declare independence and go down in history as a person who seceded from the rest of Pakistan. Secondly, he also had before him the not so good examples of unilateral declarations of independence, UDI, first in 1965 by Ian Smith of Rhodesia. Ian Smith, in November 1965, he declared Rhodesia's independence, but that declaration was never accepted by the international community until 1980 when Rhodesia had to became Zimbabwe and Ian Smith had to go. That was one instance Bangabandhu had before him. And the second instance was from 1967 when Biafra's Colonel Odumegwu Ojukwu, he declared Biafra's independence. That also collapsed. That was May 1967 when Ojukwu declared Biafra's independence. But by 1970, the Biafra experiment had collapsed. So Bangabandhu was a man of history. He was the creator of history, but he also had these historical instances in mind. So he did not want to go down that road. But he made sure that, that sooner or later, this country would become independent. Because otherwise, one cannot explain, if you ask people, why did he say that? Ebare Shongram, Mukti Shongram, Ebare Shongram, Shadhinota Shongram. Mukti Shongram, if you translate it into English, it will be emancipation. Shadhinota Shongram. So you see, he gave. A lot of people said that Bangabandhu did not declare independence. He did on the 26th of March before his arrest. But on the 7th of March, he was giving enough rope to the Pakistani military regime to hang itself with. So he had the strategy.
Very well said, Mr. Badula.
Yes. Thank you.
Enough rope to authorities to hang themselves.
And they did it because, and see, right out within days after his 7th of March speech, a foreign correspondent asked Bangabandhu in Dhaka, the General Yahya Khan would like to come to Dhaka and meet you. And Bangabandhu again gave him a clear message that Pakistan's writ did not run in Bangladesh anymore. And his statement was very simple. If General Yahya Khan wants to come to Dhaka, he is most welcome. He will be our guest. Now you can imagine, he will be our guest. The president of Pakistan going to East Pakistan, and Bangabandhu, the majority leader, he says he will be our guest. So Bangabandhu was already fixated on the idea of independence.
Great. Well, coming back to today's situation. Now, Bangladesh, in the present circumstances of this war between Russia and Ukraine, is kind of siding with the West. Now, in the economic situation, Bangladesh does need the support of the West, where most of its governments are exported to. See. And it has also annoyed the Russian administration by not allowing the ships, 69 ships I believe, not entering Bangladesh waters. See. And one of the ships was carrying some raw materials. It is said, I've read, that raw materials for the Rupur
nuclear plant,
you see, which is very vital for Bangladesh, the raw materials as well as the Rupur plant. Now, Bangladesh is in a fix right now. What to do? Please the West, or think of
yes,
the geopolitical considerations.
Bangladesh's foreign policy over the last many years, especially since 2009 when Sheikh Hasina and the Awami League came back to power, that has been a very well-concerted and well-developed foreign policy because a balance has been maintained by Bangladesh with Russia and India and China on this side. And then with the West, our relations have always been good. But then, and in the Ukraine war also, as you will realize, as everybody realizes, our economy has taken a battering. Our exports have dwindled because of these foreign buyers. They have been, they're also under pressure.
Also because of the COVID.
Because of COVID. These two factors together have sort of made it hard for Bangladesh to maintain its diplomacy in the way it would like to. Even so, the government, I think, has done very well until recently, when a number of American senior government officials have been to Dhaka, as you realize, and the pressure has been brought on Bangladesh to accede to the Western policy of sanctions on Russia. Now, the difficulty for us, the problem for us, for Bangladesh, is that we cannot afford to lose the West, lose our markets in the West. At the same time, we cannot afford to antagonize the Russians for two good reasons. One is historical. The Russians Russia, when it was the Soviet Union, they helped us hugely during our war of liberation, and especially towards the end of 1971, when they repeatedly vetoed all resolutions for a ceasefire, because they wanted the Soviet Union and India, they waited for the Pakistan army to surrender completely so that we could become independent. And even after the war, the Soviet technicians, Soviet Indian engineers, they helped us clear Chittagong port, another pair of mines. And then again, later on, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Bangladesh's relations with Russia were maintained very well. You mentioned the Rupur nuclear power plant and other economic programs that we have, economic cooperation programs that we have had with Russia. So I think the time has come when Bangladesh at this point should actually join countries which are today demanding, which are today asking that a negotiated settlement of the crisis take place. In London and in Berlin and other places, just last week, there were huge peace demonstrations asking Western governments, especially the United States and the European Union, not to provide arms to Ukraine anymore. I think Bangladesh should join that chorus, and Bangladesh's foreign policy, as far as the Ukraine conflict is concerned, it should be linked with the foreign policies of China, of Russia, and India. Indians have taken a very, very brave stand. The Indian Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar has said Europe's problems are not the world's problems. So I think there should be a coordinated, integrated approach in our region: China, Russia, Bangladesh, India, and at the same time, Bangladesh's diplomats, as I pointed out in one of my articles, Bangladesh's diplomacy in Western capitals, in Washington, London, Brussels, they should go they should undertake a very serious program of convincing the United States that our economy is dependent on so many factors, including the Russian factor. So we cannot actually accede to all these problems. If you remember, in 1974, because of PL 480, we could not deal with Cuba in terms of trade. So we don't want that kind of situation to arise again.
Well, will the West listen to the Bangladeshi request to leave us alone and let us do business as usual? Because if Bangladesh is siding with Russia.
No, Bangladesh is not siding with Russia. Bangladesh has condemned the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We all do. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia was condemnable, and we still condemn it. But a year having gone by, there's still no sign of a settlement. There's no solution. Yes. President Putin has not won the war. President Putin has not won the war, and President Zelensky has not lost the war. So it's a situation where destruction is taking place, but the destruction, the ramifications have affected not just these two countries, the Russians and the Ukrainians. It has affected the entire world, especially developing countries like ours.
Highly developed world like us, because you see the prices of consumer goods have gone up.
Consumer goods have gone up, and the fact that this war is becoming a major concern for countries around the world is to be seen by the fact that the senior Chinese diplomat was in Moscow a few days last week, meeting President Putin. Yes. French President Macron plans to visit China in April to ask President Xi Jinping to convince the Russians to go for a ceasefire. So all these efforts, these efforts indicate that the world is becoming concerned about the war, and the world is actually trying to move to a diplomatic settlement of the crisis. And if there's no diplomatic solution, there's not going to be a military solution. In Vietnam, if you remember, there's no diplomatic solution, and the result was disaster for the United States. And here also, the Russians have to rethink their strategy, and the West, as far as the West is concerned, it should give up the idea of trying to have Ukraine in the EU and NATO, because Russian security concerns are also there. So Russia does not want NATO on its borders. So that is also a consideration that should be taken into account by the West.
Well, with your political background and analysis, what do you think could have been the reason for Russia to attack Ukraine for no reason?
No, I think there was a reason, because the Russians had always insisted that NATO has been expanding. All these former communist countries, they're now part of NATO, they're part of the European Union, and Russia had always insisted that the issue of the statement of thus far and no further. But then when the West moved to have Ukraine join the alliance, that was, I think, the last straw on the camel's back. So President Putin, no one supports his decision to invade Ukraine. But then when he says, even now, when he says that Russia's security concerns were not taken into account, that is what Putin says. And on the other hand, the EU, Ursula von der Leyen and Jens Stoltenberg and even President Biden, they believe in democracy, a democratic Europe. Believing in a democratic Europe is fine, but then in a world where Russia matters, where China matters, you just don't try to impose your own ideas on them. As a long time ago, I read an article by the late, an interview by the late Singapore Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew. He told the interviewer, and the interviewer was a Western correspondent, he told him, so your idea of democracy is different from our idea of democracy. In your classrooms, when a teacher enters the classroom, students don't stand up. In our Asian society, when a teacher comes into the classroom, every student stands up. So that was one example he gave. So the point here is, see, the West has its concerns, of course. The West wants democracy. Everybody wants democracy, freedom of speech, democracy, rule of law. But at the same time, it's not a perfect world. See, and because it's not a perfect world, the Chinese system, what the Chinese have, that should be respected. What the Russians have, that should be respected. In turn, the Chinese and the Russians should also respect what the West is espousing. In the meantime, it's the Ukrainians who are suffering. President Zelensky is a very brave person. He was a comedian before becoming a president, but then history has turned him into a heroic figure. But then I think the time has come when efforts should be made to have President Zelensky and President Putin have a face-to-face meeting, have a summit. It's only these two people who can decide the future of their countries, not the West, not any other country.
Yeah, that will be no comic.
Exactly.
Something very interesting. So good news that Argentina has reopened its embassy in Dhaka. Probably the Bangladeshis would have been more happy if they had appointed Messi as ambassador.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And the bad news is Moscow and Dhaka have strained relations. See, Dhaka has to choose between Russia and West. So we've talked about it, but can really Dhaka choose, or Dhaka is walking a tightrope?
Well, it is definitely walking a tightrope. Well, we can't say that Dhaka can choose, but then Dhaka can it's walking a tightrope, but then the tightrope should be made a little easier, because Dhaka, Bangladesh is not the Bangladesh that we had in 1974, weak and underdeveloped. Economically, we have paid a price because of COVID and because of the Ukraine war, but then we are still on a good track. Yeah. And we have been so long an LDC, least developed country. We are graduating to middle income country. Yeah. That also will bring some problems, of course, say, because they will not give us the kind of treatment, kind of facilities that we have had so far as an LDC. So, and then again, Dhaka's diplomacy in the region has been working not perfectly, but then to our satisfaction. To go back to Bangabandhu's policy, say friendship for all and malice toward none, that is the policy Bangladesh has consistently demonstrated throughout its 52 years of independent existence. So I think, as I said earlier, for Bangladesh, the important thing is to strengthen its diplomacy. See, our embassies, our foreign policy establishment, they should be strengthened in a way that we can argue, we can talk to foreigners, foreign governments on an equal intellectual level.
In one
That is what we need.
sentence, can you say what is the weakness of the foreign policy?
We need one weakness that I would say is that we do not always have the right diplomats in the right places. So, and if we have properly intellectual people who understand geopolitics, people who understand diplomacy, they should be placed in right places. I'm not saying all of them, but then.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you for being with us, and thank you for listening to this interesting discussion provided by our guest today. It was wonderful having you here, and I'm sorry I was away for about 5 weeks. See you again next week.